All right, what up, YouTube, man? It's your boy Vest to Vest. I'm back at it again, man. This time around, bro, this is the the Diaspora series. I'm here with my buddy Nate the Great, man. Paying a visit, bro. Today we're gonna be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, man. But the first thing I wanted to start off with is, it's been a while, man. I haven't seen you in a minute. What you been up to, bro?
Listen, just living, working, school, typical adult life stuff. Yeah, staying low. Now I got family.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm growing. I'm growing.
That's what's up, bro. That's what's up, man. And recently, bro, you were studying. You haven't quite finished on your master's yet.
Yes. You're
Right.
correct.
So when you plan on finishing that?
May of next year, so May of 2024. It's a program, Master of Science and Data Analytics at Franklin University.
Okay.
I switched careers, was in chemistry, so now I'm going down that path. So I'll finish in May of 2024.
Fantastic, man. Fantastic. And I know, we go way back, right? Since
Exactly.
high school,
Exactly.
man, and all that, man. And I know after graduation, you went off to Rice to study, right? So, was it, when you went off to Rice to study, initially, was it engineering that you were pursuing then, or were you pursuing chemistry at that time?
Chemical engineering. So virtually, yes, it was chemistry influenced, but chemical engineering. And that's what my major was during my time at Rice. So yeah.
Okay. All right, man. Well, let's reverse that a little bit, man. How'd you like your experience at high school, man?
High school was great for me. I hear a lot of people say that they didn't have a good high school experience. It was great. Starting off, it was a typical high school experience. You see the cliques and stuff. You kind of just go to class. It's clockwork.
Yeah.
But once you get involved in organizations, like we were in STEM club and
For sure.
did cross country and track, things started to blossom. My grades were up. They gave us ceremonies, recognitions. We traveled, so it was great.
Fantastic, man. And then you did track, like you just mentioned, man.
Exactly.
How'd you like sports, man? Because I know outside of sports, you, like you mentioned, we were part of the STEM club. So how was track?
Track was great. Track and cross country were both great. One, it kept me in shape.
Yeah.
Right now, like with everything going on, like I work out and stuff, but finding that balance is one thing I just started to do, so I'm starting to find like my ideal body type. But I learned that in the sports, trying to figure out what I want to look like and how I want to feel, like physically. And you have another group of friends who may not be in STEM club, who have a different lifestyle.
Yes,
like you
sir.
said, it was very nerdy in STEM club, but that was great too. But yeah, sports brought on its own, had fruits of its own outside of STEM club and things like that, the academic pursuits.
Nice. And I don't know if you recall, man, but Mr. Fast used to talk about how life was gonna hit us when we got to college.
Yes.
He always used to complain and go on and on and on. And even back then, it didn't seem like we didn't quite know what the heck is complaining about, right? Till we got to college and got to experience life for ourselves. So I want to ask you, how true was that? How true was what Mr. Fast was saying?
100% true. Because the sort of mantra I've been going by since I've been an adult is life is not cookie cutter.
Okay.
There's no one puzzle piece that can fit everybody's life. We all have our own vantage points and everything. So not judging by other people's timelines in terms of how they complete their goals.
Yeah.
And other things like that is something I had to learn as I became an adult. And so he was 100% right. I definitely did not complete my degree in 4 years, my undergrad degree.
Yeah.
I took about 3.5, 4 years off, non-consecutive. So, because of main things, life troubles, family members passing, my own sickness and ailments. So it's just a matter of taking care of yourself, enjoying life, and making sure you find that balance. Because if you're too much into work, then you don't have time to, balance out later on in life, maybe, because you may not get there later on in life.
Yeah, definitely.
5 years going past, you may not have the engineering degree, so or you may not be in nursing school. So it's important to also remember to stay focused and stay steadfast on whatever path you choose.
I feel you, man. I feel you on that, man. And sorry again, my condolences, about family members passing and all that.
Yeah.
So you struggled a bit, in college, as I would imagine. Were there any specific subjects that you recall struggling, really struggling in?
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for the condolence.
Yeah.
But secondly, I wouldn't say it was subject-based. It was environment-based.
Okay.
So, for example, at Rice, that's your typical big university. Even though it's a small class, it's a small university in general.
Yeah.
The class sizes were huge lecture halls, especially for the engineering majors.
Okay.
And so what happens is you don't get that one-on-one attention. There isn't that sort of unilateral focus on students.
Yeah.
Now, I followed up by going to Capital University, which is where my chemistry degree is from.
Okay.
And being that it's a liberal arts school, the class sizes were smaller. And I truly feel like there was no class I took there that I couldn't comprehend the subjects being taught.
Okay.
For me, the reason I got any bad marks is because I wasn't doing the assignments or I wasn't attending. And that all goes back to what I was saying earlier. The reason is because of family members being sick, me being sick, or some other extenuating circumstances, finances, or whatever it may be. So, I just think that really it's about knowing yourself. That's, like Aristotle put it, knowing yourself is the best way to go forward. And so I think everybody needs to think about, all right, what problems do I have? Do I have problems focusing, right? Like I told you, I just learned at the end of last year, that I have ADHD, formally diagnosed, finally. So it's about knowing yourself, and then knowing that you go into look at universities you want to apply to and what you want to major in.
Yeah.
And then you go from there and then think, okay, well, I excel in this environment, right? Because you can be a big fish in a little pond, as Malcolm Gladwell talks about. But if that little pond is not where you best swim, then you need to move on to maybe an ocean.
I feel you, man. You mentioned, Aristotle saying knowing yourself. I guess that, that leads on to the next question that I really wanted to ask you, and that is, I think I've heard the saying, in various circles, man, and I said the same thing when I interviewed Josh, that from what I've heard, black people don't read much, right? And so one of the things that I want to do, so I want to dispel that kind of notion with these series and also highlight a few other things as well. So what book, that you've read in the past or reading currently, would you say have had a great influence on you?
So as you know, one of our mentors in high school, Mr. Hawkins, he started us off on this literary journey, and one of the books he introduced to us was called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Yes, sir.
And that book was great because it was his musings as an emperor. I think it was directed at his father, but even so, it was just the idea of his musings, and that just was like, you find out, you open yourself up to a different worldview.
Yeah.
There's a philosopher named Mary Migley, and she talks about moral isolationism.
Okay.
And I like to think about isolationism in totality, not just moral, but social, cultural. One of the ways we can connect, even more than now because of social media, is by engaging other cultures through their literature.
Okay.
So that's one thing to do, and even through different time periods, like Marcus Aurelius' time period, a lot of things ring true now, right? One of the mantras that he put forth was get everything into the simplest form.
Yes,
and that's
sir.
something I follow to this day, right? Don't overcomplicate things.
Yes.
Intelligent people make complicated things simple.
Yes.
So it's about, when it comes to that notion about black people not reading, that's definitely not true. There are many literate black people, and especially in our generation, Generation Y, millennials, you're starting to see different forms of literacy too, right?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be in a paper book, right? It doesn't have to be in a tangible book. It can be an online article. It could be a manga. It could be a comic book. So literacy comes in multiple forms too. So it's important to keep that in mind. But yes, there are a lot of people who are out there, being black, proud, and literate, sun-kissed, and well-read. So I think that notion, is very silly.
I like that, man. I like that, bro. And I mean, I like the way, you really explain it. And I've also heard this quote by Richard Feynman saying that if you can't explain it, simply, then you don't understand it.
Exactly, right.
From our background, from our history, I mean, we've been part of the STEM club. We went on to go study engineering. I mean, people from where we come from would consider us as nerds, right?
Yes.
And then another thing, I guess another thing that I've also heard is that, I mean, I've heard this question before, are nerd freaky, man? You feel me? So, hey, man, we can't have an interview like this without really, really getting into the nitty gritty parts, man. And the fun parts too, man. So, in your opinion, man, I know you to be a nerd. I'm a nerd, man. How freaky are you? What's the freakiest thing you ever did?
All right, listen, I'll expand on it. I'll start general, and then I'll come down to the apex.
All right, man.
But so like nerdism is mainstream now, right? So like all of the sort of tropes about nerds in the past and things like that, they're played out, right? They're archaic. So when we talk about nerds being anything but other than just a nerd, anything is possible, right? You can be a hood nerd. Yeah. You can be a freaky nerd, all those things are true. In terms of me, I think that's another thing too, though, because like you talk about, are nerds freaky, but then we also have to keep in mind that sometimes black men are over-sexualized too. So a lot of times we're taught to seek sex and men in general, but especially black men, right? So like, I had to find out, like, you know, in my journey as growing as a man from adolescence into adulthood, I had to figure out what was that balance, right? Because I seen examples in my life, you know, of people who were, you know, having children and not being there for the mother, like instantaneously, as soon as they found out they were having a kid, and things like that. And so they were living up to the archetype of the black missing dad, right? That went to get the milk and never returned. So, you know, I had to keep that in mind, but also I realized that my sexuality didn't have to be based on some cornball gender norms or something like that. So, like, you know, when it came to, you know, meeting women and things like that, I was very forthcoming about things I liked and just exploring myself. And I think that's an important thing. When I was a president of Ebony Brotherhood Association at Capitol, we had a series called Interracial Dating and Sex, where we talked about those intersectionalities between dating outside your race, or and then exploring your, you know, sexuality. Now, you know, here as a black straight man, I don't feel threatened by anybody else's practices or anything like that. However, you know, there's times where, you know, you want to maybe, you know, just relax, right? And, you know, you want to be able to talk about these things. So it's actually good. I'm glad you asked that, right? Because we should be more open about things like that.
Comfortable talking about these subjects.
Absolutely. So no, I mean, I've definitely explored. I've had my explorations and things like that, and you know, in that nature. And I think that it's important as black men that we find that balance between not feeling like we have to let that define us, like sex and sexuality, and being like sort of like that predator stereotype that people tend to put on us and label us as. However, we shouldn't also be afraid to like be ourselves, right? You know, don't feel like we have to just be so high strung where we can't, you know, say, hey, look, we meet a woman, we mutually agree, right? Because my thing is, I have no problem with what any mutual human adults want to do, right? All of those things, those are all inclusive, right? So anything outside that, it's a problem, right? So if it's children, if it's animals, anything like that, that's a huge problem, right? So, but I have no problem with any mutual human adults want to do. So I think it's important that if you want to do that with balance. When you're young, that should be more than a minimum, I think. You should focus on what you want to do for a living and things of that nature. You're young, right?
Yes, sir.
And then as you get older, right, start to introduce it more, but also be safe, right? Get tested. You know, use
wrap
protection.
It up.
Wrap it up.
Sir.
No euphemisms, right? Wrap it up, right? And so it's important. But I've explored myself, and I think that is important to say that, right? To say that you can explore your sex, you know, your yearning sexually and be forthcoming without being overwhelming, you know, because it's too much sometimes if you're just overbearing, and there's so many archetypes out there, whether it be the nice guy or whatever, where, you know, you're just like this fake guy trying to get sex out of a woman, trying to be nice, or you're just overbearing and you're actually being rapey. You know, so you gotta avoid all that. But also, it's okay to find that golden mean, so to say, right? Like Archimedes talked about that point in the point of certainty, where you can know that, okay, this isn't too much, but also I get to put myself out there, to a woman you meet or whoever. You know, if you're not a black straight man, or if you're not straight, whatever, right? Whatever. Just find your peace in the world.
Okay, man. I feel like you just give like a politician's way of, you feel me? Like an answer, man. I mean, not quite, man. I feel like you kind of avoided the question, man. Are nerds freak or not, man?
Oh yeah. Listen, nerds can be freaky. Yeah, and that was the summary, right? That was the thesis statement, right? Nerds can be freaky, absolutely.
Okay.
For sure. And there are nerds who are more traditional, though, right? Like nerds who they only focus on video games and they go home and everything like that, and that's okay too, right? If they're like sexually sterile in that way. But nerds can like have yearnings and stuff like that. But that's what I was hitting on too, because I feel like a lot of nerds, especially traditional ones, they fall into this sort of nice guy archetype where it's like they try to play the nice guy and they complain about women only wanting the thug and stuff like that. And I want to tell, you know, especially black nerds, blurs, you know what they call them as a amalgam, you know, like don't fall for that. Don't go into that archetype, because that's just as bad as the thug, right? The thug is at least forthcoming, right? To kind of use an analogy, you know how Malcolm X talked about the wolf and the sheep, right? You know, everybody knows, you know, or the fox and the wolf, excuse me. So, you know, everybody knows the wolf is a big bad person and everything like that, but the fox is sly.
Okay.
You know, the nice guy archetype tends to fall on nerves. So, you know, if you have sexual yearnings, be forthcoming. You know, not necessarily like the thug in terms of being abrasive, but be forthcoming in the sense that you're honest, that's mutual, and that's respectable, and that the timing is right? Don't just do it out in public, And, you know, it's okay if you're quirky. That may be a charm. That may be an aphrodisiac of some sort. You know, so it's just about avoiding that archetype, right? Nerds can be freaky, but I think the caveat there, or the asterisk there, is that don't be that nice guy archetype where you try to act like you're nice so you deserve sex, right?
I feel you, man.
Yeah, so yeah, nerds can be freaky, but yes, I hope all the nerds listening avoid it, man or woman,
man,
or whatever.
You heard it here first, man. All right, man. So I'm looking at you, bro. You swagged out, man. You came here, bro. You got that, bro. Like simple, man. Like casual. And then I'm looking at your hand and I see a ring, bro. So like, what is this? Like a purity ring? What is this, bro?
You know, I'm not gonna say it's juvenile because it's definitely not. It is a promise ring. Like a promise ring is just saying, hey, this is a tangible form of commitment, right?
Yeah.
To my girlfriend, that, you know, I'm committed. I'm in it for the long run. I'm not here at, you know, 31 years old. I'm not here trying to play games or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what I was saying in the previous question, right? Being forthcoming, being honest about your intentions.
Yes, sir.
So that's what I'm doing with this ring. It's just making it tangible. And it doesn't have to be, right? We know people who've been in long relationships, they don't have a ring. They don't have anything that symbolizes it other than the fact that they're still together.
Yes, sir.
And that's all that matters in most cases. But I just like to make it tangible, right? Look, I'm wearing this. And this is a universal statement. This is a universal language right here, right?
Yeah.
On the left hand, the ring finger, having the ring on there. So the fact that it's blue, it's just a silicone ring. But like, that's why I got it, right? Because I want it to last, you know. The engagement ring and the wedding ring, they're down the road, right?
I feel you, bro.
And, you know, all the bling and everything that comes with that. I sound like, oh, that's man saying that.
So, yeah, man, I like that. I like that, bro. Like, you're a man of commitment, man. A lot of guys have issues, man, committing, bro.
Absolutely.
And then a lot of the females, you know, these days also don't exude qualities, man, that kind of brings out commitment from a male, right? And so I wanted to ask you then, what are the sort of qualities that you look for in a woman? Since, you know, you've been with how long you been with your woman again?
I say, what is it, 2.5 years now? You know, I'll be totally honest. We had a little break in between, but altogether 2.5 years.
2.5 years, right? Mm-hmm. I don't recall the last time I was with a girl for like more than 5 months, right? So I wanted to ask you, man, what sort of qualities do you look for in a woman?
You mind if I kind of rephrase that? Because what I would start with, I always start with within, right? What I start with myself.
Yeah.
So like in terms of commitment, I had to look at what qualities am I bringing to the table, right?
Okay. Wow, that's so interesting. That's deep. I have not seen anybody do a self-reflection before they answer that question. So I'm definitely actually interested in what you have to say.
And that's what my journey's led me to, a point of humility. But yes, in terms of that, it's funny you mentioned commitment because that was my problem in terms of that break we had.
Yeah.
Like it was this you know, burgeoning anxiety that I've always had with commitment with a lot of things, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it be a major, whether it be sometimes a job, but then also relationships. Okay. I had commitment anxiety. So I had to truly confront that because I really do like her and I loved her then, and like, you know, I was growing to love her, and then now I love her for sure. But you know, it was because I was flaky and doing things, so I had to kind of look within. Yeah. So for me, I had to just be consistent. I had to work on like what are my love languages, learn how to express that outwardly, because I was bad at being romantic too, like showing my love, right? Okay. And being thoughtful too. Sometimes I was going through the motions. A lot of times I was, and she brought that to my attention. And previous women have too. And it's just that with her, since I really wanted to work, I started paying attention, and something that some us men we need to think about. But in terms of women, the qualities I look for in a woman, you know, I look for, like, I actually made a physical list. I wrote it down, like, wow, on my phone, actually, an old phone of mine. But like, you know, so honesty, communication, you know, the general things people look for, mutual well-wishing, another Aristotle philosophical axiom. But yeah, things like that. And more particularly to romantic relationships, because that's any type of interpersonal relationship, you know, friendship, anything, honesty, communication. And so any relationship goes with that. But for romantic, kind of hitting on what we talked about earlier, I think sexual compatibility. You got to be able to talk about what you like and dislike, you know, stuff like that. Right. And also love languages and things of that nature. But I look for a woman to also just, I think the honesty part and communication part are most fundamental. And I'm not saying I've been the best at this, but I just need communication. Like, if something's wrong, tell me, right? Yeah. I want to be able to fix it. Or if it's immutable, then we got to kind of agree to part ways at that point. You know? Right. So, so communicate. Being able to talk to each other as peers respectfully. My mom drilled constructive criticism in me, but I think somehow, I do believe that how you say things matters, right? Yeah. I'm kind of going a little too fast, but how you say things matter. So being able to, communicate with a tonality in a language that's respectful, right? Even if it's in a negative critique of someone, a critique of your partner, rather.
Yeah.
It's important to be able to communicate that, because some people pride themselves on being blunt, but being blunt is not a way of life. It's like pride, right? It's like one of those sort of vices or those endpoints that we shouldn't go towards. We should go to that golden mean in the middle, not necessarily 50-50, but it's somewhere in between those two vice and virtue points. So some people pride themselves on being blunt, but we need to think about that for a second, because being blunt just means that you have no way of communicating in a way that's emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
So emotional intelligence will be a part of that too. That's a huge thing. So yeah, when it comes to that, honesty, communication, but not being arrogant and having the emotional intelligence to know how to communicate how you feel. And I've fallen short on that too. I've been irritable, so I had to check that myself, right? I didn't want to live up to that angry black man stereotype,
I feel you, bro. I mean, I've heard the saying so many times that about more than 90% of communication is nonverbal, right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Right, and so all the stuff that you talked about, body language, tonality, all this stuff, I mean, that hits, very, very closely. And then I also wanted to ask you, because recently you traveled to Thailand.
Yes.
Right, and was that your first time traveling outside the U.S.?
Technically, yes. Like we had that math trip to Canada, but that's the true first time traveling outside the country.
Okay.
Toronto is nothing but like really a suburb of, East Coast USA, so I'll say that's the first time, truly.
I feel you, man. I remember that trip to Canada. I even wasn't able to go because of all the immigration issues that I was having back in high school, man. So I met up with I met Salah and Warsan recently at Westival Sports Complex. I was just walking and clear my head after work, and I met Warsan, and we were talking about how I couldn't go to Canada because of the whole immigration issue. But yeah, you recently traveled to Thailand. I want to know what the experience was like, what your likes and dislikes were when you were out there.
Sure. Likes. I love that even in the midst of sort of modernization, urbanization, you can still see the cultural values, right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's okay for a group or a geographical location in a faction or a collection of people to have shared values, right? That's actually what brings people together, our shared values.
Yeah.
So, being that like Buddhism is their predominant religion, you saw the Buddha statues, you saw the temples, and like I told you about Songkran Festival, which is like a merging of sort of like secular and religious practices, right? In the morning they went to the temple, and it's like week long. They would go to the temple and then show respect to their elders and whatnot. But then in the afternoon and evenings, they would have these water gun fights. It's kind of like a celebration, but it's also using nature, right? Water is essential to all of our lives.
Yes,
so it's one of those beautiful things. And so that's one thing I loved. But then there are many other things too, just like the fact that there were still fresh fruit farmers markets and things of that nature. They had elephant rides that they gave probably 2 hours out. I think it was I don't want to butcher the name, Ching Thong, I think. Yes, nearby city.
That sounds like a character from Mortal Kombat, man.
Yeah, but that's the funny thing you say, because Mortal Kombat was made by Americans who mispronounced a lot of Japanese names in there. So Raiden should be Raiden, and Shirai Ryu should be Shirai Ryu, but that's another topic, right?
Yeah.
But so I love that, right? They explain the history of elephants as like horses. It's analogous to horses in America.
Yeah.
It was used in wars as a form of transportation, but also as a cavalry, for the cavalry rather. But then there are other parts too I saw, like I love the healthcare system and the fact that like you didn't have to have a primary care doctor. There weren't all these barriers to entry to healthcare. But then there were other things too I saw, like the pollution, right?
Yeah.
And the air quality, bad. People were wearing masks prior to COVID because of the air quality. And my dad and I realized that, we should have been wearing our masks. We felt so bad. And now we're starting to see it here in America. You got Canadian wildfires and stuff like that. And it's starting to get bad just because of climate change and global warming in general. But it's always, it's been a lingering problem in a lot of Asian, Southeast Asian, and Far East Asian countries because of overpopulation and a lack of regulation. The only other thing I would say too is that, like, in terms of a downside is just it does feel a bit crowded, and that's not exclusively Thailand or exclusively Bangkok where I was.
Yeah.
I think that the part of that is too capitalism and urbanization. It's giving way, right? We're in late stage capitalism here, and it's starting to spread across the world. We need to find modern solutions for these modern problems, and it does involve being greedy and hoarding wealth and building unnecessarily big properties. And so like they had great malls that were better than Easton and here in Columbus, Ohio, and
Say you serious?
Yeah,
man?
yeah. Like they had all the luxury stores: Gucci, Louis, Louboutin, all of them, right? Were stores we don't even have here.
Wow.
And their malls were traditional in the sense that it was built up, and that's probably a solution too, right? Build it up instead of out. We live in 3D space, right? Because like for example, surface lot parking spaces take up a lot of regional planning. And messes with zoning laws and things like that. But that was one of the things I noticed in Thailand, But overall, I had a great time, seeing my brother's wedding at the beach. It's a beautiful, people, beautiful country. I felt welcome. I didn't feel any like true residual racism or anything.
Yeah.
Not saying it doesn't exist or that it can't exist. I'm just saying I didn't experience it in those 2 weeks I was there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I see, man. I like that, man. And did you go on the elephant rides?
No, I didn't, and part of the reason why is because my brother forgot to tell me I needed to bring a change of clothes.
Oh.
Because the elephants like to go into the water. The other reason why is I went to see if my girlfriend wanted to come to Thailand, and we could do that together because my sister-in-law's friend and her boyfriend did a ride, then my brother did it with his wife, my sister-in-law, and the kids, and his kids, my nieces. And so, it seemed like something you would do with a partner, so I wanted to do that with my girlfriend, and that's the plan in the future. If it happens.
I see, man. And one thing I notice, at least when I travel outside the U.S., is that I am not so I don't have to be so conscious of my color. Like if you in the U.S., at least when I walk outside, I'm always consistently conscious that I'm black, because if a police car is passing by, that reminds me, hey, you're black. I mean, if you got a hoodie on, get the hood off. If it could be the neighborhood I'm walking, or I want to make sure I'm not sagging or anything like that.
I definitely understand.
Yeah, but when I travel outside the U.S., these are not concerns, that are consistently, reverberating in my mind. Was that the same with you as well?
Actually, I had some concern because I'm going to a country where even fewer people look like me.
Okay.
So, and also it's my first time, so I had some anxiety about it. Some like lingering anxiety. It wasn't really my main concern, right? But when I got there, I realized, people it was welcoming. And part of that is because some of these countries, like, yes, there is the glitz and the glamour, like I talk about the malls, but there's still a lot of poverty, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like a facade. It is a facade, rather. And that's one of the problems I was hitting on. And so when I'm there, I didn't necessarily experience any, mainly because they're set up like tourist attractions. They're meant to welcome people and foreigners.
Yeah.
And so it is welcoming in that sense. But like, for example, when COVID-19 hit, China wrongly blamed Africans for the virus, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because anytime a virus comes out of Africa, it's named after the city it comes out there. Zika, West Nile, any Ebola.
Yeah.
They're named after the cities or town it comes from. But we call it COVID-19. We didn't call it Wuhan virus.
Yeah.
So it's like interesting that, there's still this lingering xenophobia towards from those of us from the diaspora.
Yes, sir.
So, I'm weary of that, right? And I know it's true, especially if I were to travel to London or any other Western country, that there's going to be that sort of same residual like fear of same shit, different day racism that you talk about.
Okay.
Being, watching out for police and not sagging and feeling like you have to dress a certain way. I'm wearing Sperry's for a reason, right? Like,
yes,
I love
sir.
how they look, but like at the same time, it kind of brings this sort of Urkel-esque.
Yes. I'm not threatening, like
black man,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and to be honest, the first reason is kind of like them, they're comfortable, but secondly, I know that I get that sort of ambiance, right? The glasses, the shoes, I got this nerdy Mega Man shirt, right? And so it's like, it's kind of almost like, a veil of sorts, but even then I can still be persecuted under the eyes of a racist, right?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, when I traveled abroad, I still, even though I didn't experience it directly, I still felt like, it could happen though, right?
Okay.
I know if I travel to like a westernized country, it can happen for sure, because we talk about the Englands and the Americas and things like that. We have diversity, which is good, but we need pluralism where we're accepting the cultures, not just coexisting, right? We need to actually find ways to get along, even with their cultural differences. So plurality over diversity, equity over equality, right? And that's one thing that I think these modern countries are struggling with, because we have so much diversity, right? It's not 90% one race, right? It's a hodgepodge.
Okay. I like that, man. And another thing that I wanted to ask you is, I'm not sure, all the years that we've been, friends, going back to high school and all that, I haven't quite gotten a clear grasp of your faith. Are you a believer? Like, what do you believe? Well, what's that story on that?
Oh yeah, I went through a religious journey. So right now I consider myself agnostic, right?
Okay.
So agnostic means, like, if we were to translate it literally, it means I don't know, right?
Okay.
It just means uncertain, right? And I wouldn't say indifferent, but that would be kind of inaccurate. So like, yeah, I'm agnostic. And I was going on a journey, right? There's times where I lean towards the Christian livelihood I was raised up in.
Yeah.
But the main thing, I've heard someone else say this. I couldn't even tell you the name. I saw it probably on YouTube. Someone say this. I don't like to take credit for things I didn't come up with.
Yeah.
But the problem with a lot of, especially practicing Christians in America, is that it becomes more of a family tradition than a religion. They're only doing it because their parents are doing it, and they don't have a true adherence to it.
That is true.
Or it's done out of fear, where you're doing it because you just don't want to go to hell, but that's disingenuous. And God would know your intentions, as we've described, right? As Christians described, as the Abrahamic religion described, Islam and Judaism. So if that's the case, then God would know your true intentions if that's your only intention, right?
Right.
So I think, purifying my intentions, it wasn't forced on me. Yeah, I prayed growing up. My dad's Christian, and we prayed over our food, prayed before bed. We didn't really go to church. I've been in church probably 7 times in my life.
Yeah.
But I think that freedom and that looseness allowed me to explore, and I hope everybody can go on their own journey. Even if you do become a Christian, I'm not against Christianity. I'm just saying, in our predominant Christian society, that we have to think about, like, sort of our tacit assumptions, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to think about that, because we don't ever want to go through life just accepting things just because it was told to us.
Right.
It's important to have sort of an objective purview about everything we were raised up with, right? A lot of people talk about breaking generational curses. Now, I'm not saying religion is a curse, In a lot of ways, it helps people get through hard times. And there have been times where I've had some hard times and I wasn't religious, and I thought, man, I need to find some way to muster up the courage to go through this thing.
Right.
So yeah, Christian religion has its place in the world. But I've come to be agnostic because I've seen truth in all religions, and I don't think they're all the same either. Different truths from different religions. People like to say God is one, but from taking courses at Capital, which is a Lutheran school, I've come to believe that God is not one, right? Because if the practice is different, then the God is different. Our way of, like, the way humans connect to God, whether monotheistic or polytheistic, is by way of practice. And so if the practice is different, the way that person views God is different. So yeah, I've kind of taken all the truths, right? I still, I believe that if we practice the teachings as Jesus laid out, right, in the New Testament, the world would be a beautiful place, right?
It would definitely be a beautiful place.
Yes, exactly. So I have nothing against religion, nothing against Christianity. It's just we have extremists and zealots here and there who give it a bad name, who do things to the extreme. We talk about 9/11, not just that. You can talk about Palestine. You can talk about a lot of countries, right?
That's true. That's true. And a lot of people I talk just say, I just want to be a good person.
Exactly.
But that's a bit kind of iffy for me, because your notion of good and my notion of good might be different.
Exactly.
What if my notion of good, God forbid, just picking up a gun and running up a mall and shooting everybody?
Exactly.
In my mind, that's good to me. So if we're going off based on, I just want to be good, then whose good are we judging that by?
Exactly.
You got any comment, regarding that?
Yeah, so I see what you're saying, and I'm not trying to imply what you're saying, but or implicate you in anything you're saying, but if I guess you're in a society where there's one religion, then it'll be easier to determine that. But the thing is too, when you have a society ran by religion, and where religion is like at the center, right? It's the epicenter of everything. I think one of the major problems that can come from that is that you don't have the freedom to think for yourself sometimes, right? Like I told you, it becomes a family tradition. If there's only one religion, you're going to be raised in that. You're going to be told that that's correct. And growing up, I've seen that. People just believe things at face value. And so I think the freedom of thought that also allows for innovation. We talked about, Isaac Newton was religious, and he made a lot of discoveries, but then also it's held him back too, right? He could have probably made even more discoveries, So I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about that, right? Like Isaac Newton could have made more discoveries in terms of perturbation theory, right? How the planets tug on each other, but he attributed that to God, right? So now you're creating God as the sort of the perimeter of what your knowledge is, instead of actually pursuing beyond that. So we need to think about that, having religion at the epicenter of a society, right? I think religious freedom, as the founding fathers outlined on paper, is how we should practice it. And I say it like that because obviously we know a lot of things the founding fathers did on paper is not in practice, and that's the problem.
Now I get what you're saying. But I mean, if we're both logical people,
yes,
we've been part of the STEM club, for a while, and then we went off to go study engineering. So in that sense, then, if you look at STEM, if you look at math, if you look at all this other, like stuff in STEM, you will see that even in math, there's a general truth,
Yes.
right? Where I'm not gonna say that 1 + 1 is 2, and then you come along and you said 2 + 2 is 5. In math, in science, there are general truths, right?
Yes.
1 + 1 should be 2, and so. And this idea is what guides science innovation, because if I come up with an experiment here, someone needs to be able to reproduce it in England or Africa or China or wherever that that may be. So shouldn't that be true? Truth in general should be one, should be general or universal.
Yeah.
And so how then are we saying that when it comes to religion, when it comes to faith, based question, then we're saying, we're reverting, back and saying there are multiple truths.
Yes.
There are many ways to truths. I mean, so could you clarify that? Because I don't quite understand. I think there should be a universal truth, and truth should be truth, despite, no matter where you go. 1 + 1 will be 2 in Mars, on the moon, anywhere.
Exactly. So to your point, though, religion isn't a science, and that's part of it, right?
Okay.
Religion isn't meant to answer questions about the natural world the same way science isn't meant to answer questions about spirituality.
Okay.
So, as I alluded to earlier, Archimedes, right? He talks about the point of certainty, right? And the best way I can explain this is statistically, right? You have a plane, Cartesian, whatever. Imagine you have a scatter plot, bunch of dots, right?
Yeah.
On this plane.
Yes.
You draw a line of best fit through those dots.
Right.
All those dots are personal truths, right?
Yes.
Individual truths.
Okay.
The line is the absolute truth, right? We, as humans, religiously, approximate universal truth through our own experiences. One of my problems with how religion is practiced is that people stop at the text. But there's a life before the text and after the text in all the contexts of religion.
That's so true. Yeah, go ahead.
Capital, being a Lutheran school, you have to talk about Martin Luther. He wasn't in the Bible. He came after, right? Putting a note on the on the door, rather, right? So you have to talk about the entirety of it, right? It's an approximation. So, and because it's subjective, religion is subjective, that's something that people struggle with, you can only approximate it. It will never be 100% confident. There was never 100% confidence as a scientist, right? You can only report things with at most 99% confidence you do a hypothesis test.
For sure.
So it's important that we remember that, we're approximating something that's subjective. And religion is not even taught that way. I think one thing that has been consistent in a lot of religions is that you walk by faith, right?
Yes.
And faith is meant to be blind, right? There's that trust that the truth you're pursuing is true, and that we're talking about afterlife especially. That's something that none of us have experienced. And until it can be debunked, we don't know if there's afterlife or not. So we, by faith, walk on that for those who are religious. And I say we, but I'm talking we as humanity.
Right.
Humans walk by faith to find out that truth, whether or not it's true, right? These things are true. They're not self-evident, and they're not empirical as well, right? We can't test this, right? How can we test something that was said to have happened years ago other than use our science and math, right? Can all the animals fit on Noah's Ark? And there have been scientific tests that say, oh, no, it couldn't happen. But then there's also a museum of Christianity, right, where it says it did happen. But then that same science you're talking about is an absolute truth, right, where 2 + 2 can't equal 5, says that this thing that happened in the Bible couldn't have happened, right? And so it's there are miracles in there and things like that. So it's we have to accept that it's not meant to be absolute literal in terms of the anecdotes in the Bible or anecdotes in any religion, but particularly the Bible, because there's so many different genres of writing, right? Poetry, letters, right? Epistolary ones, and things of that nature, right? There's commandments, instruction manual. You wouldn't read an instruction manual the same way you would read a poem, same way you would read a letter, right?
Right.
So, it's more important how we interpret our religion for ourselves, right? Malcolm X talked about that. Going back to him, it's an internal truth. And collectively, if people share your internal truth in some way, shape, or form, you all can approximate some part of universal truth. And that's how you build society, right? You get this collective, this religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, any religion. Have them all come together and say, what are the universal core values? And then out of all these groups, which ones do we share? Right. And then that's how you build society, right? Yeah, murder. Nobody wants to die. Murder's bad. Lying's bad. And, of course there's exceptions, right? It's nuance, but murder's bad. Lying's bad. Things of that nature. And so that's how you come together in a society where there are cultural and religious practices that are different amongst each group, each faction. So yeah, that's how I say we approximate universal truth is through our own collective individual truths. It's an approximation at best.
Okay. I mean, I understand that. And then I think one thing I also wanted to ask you is that now you've started, well, I wouldn't say now you've started working. You've been working for quite some time now, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, could you give maybe a bit of a background as to maybe even where you started, how you've been maybe promoted over the years or transitioned? And then you mentioned that you changed careers recently.
Yes, absolutely. So, my first job, 16, I was working at Franklin University, where I'm now going to school for. We're going to school at, excuse me.
Yeah.
I was an office assistant. It was a summer job through Faith Ministries.
Yeah.
My chemistry teacher, Miss Young, at the time at Northland, she told us about it, so I signed up.
Miss Young.
Yes.
I remember Miss Young.
Yeah.
She taught physical science.
Yeah, she did. She taught physical science. She taught chemistry. She didn't teach AP chemistry, but yeah, she taught those too. And so yeah, what happened was, Mondays we would go to church. We would learn things about business and just how to carry ourselves and things like that. Tuesday through Friday, we would work on site at a location. And I was an office assistant. Then after that, I worked at the polls one day for an election while I was a senior in high school. And then my first true job, I would say, was at Rose's in 2014. It was 2014 was supposed to be a year, assuming that I went all 4 years at school.
Yeah.
The year I was supposed to graduate, right?
Yes.
And so, here I am working as a cashier, right? Customer service representative for minimum wage, man.
A cashier, but I worked as a cashier too at Walmart, man. I almost got my ass beat, man, because I gave the wrong change to some dude, man.
Oh, I got threatened too. I got threatened because they, the U-boat, the thing that you push all the heavy equipment on.
Yeah.
A guy went to take that home. I told him we couldn't. He said, "Can I talk to your manager?" I went to got the manager. The manager told him, he started to cuss me out. Listen, if it comes to that, then it is what it is. I ain't scared of that, but I wasn't looking for it. And it's like, man, that's too much stress for a minimum wage, man. And the funny thing is, I was happy. I think I was just happy to be working at the time because I went through so much.
Yeah.
I had mental breakdowns and things like that right before that job. So it was a lot that went on, in terms of mental health too, which is something that, talking about black men and black people is a whole other dog in another fight. But yeah, so I was a cashier. Then I became a cashier at Staples. I was hoping I was gonna get this internship at Mettler Toledo as a lab tech.
Yeah.
But that didn't go pan through. So I was like, I don't even want to do this. And so I went back the following semester to Capital. I took some time off.
Yeah.
And then during my time back, I was at lab TA, right? A lab teaching assistant, and that opened the gateway to getting a chemistry position, right? I was chemical lab tech at a place called Animatic in Johnstown, New Albany, that area.
Yeah.
And that was my first ever job in the field, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And that was cool, right? 'Cause I was doing actual chemistry, right? Bench chemistry, empirical testing. Had the beakers and stuff, did tests around the clock. It was what they call cookbook chemistry, right? It was just routine testing, entry-level job, but it felt good, right? I had that job. I felt like I was being myself because I was a chemistry major at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah. But then my mom passed. So I took time. I didn't take bereavement when she passed.
Yeah.
So what I did was I ended up leaving it a few months later because I really started to it started to weigh on me. Took some time off. Then I went to another chemistry position for a pharmaceutical company. Did that work. I wasn't really feeling it at the time. I was still kind of going through things. So a bunch of chemistry positions. Then what spurred the change is that, at the end of 2021, I was about to start a chemistry position or a lab tech position. And the description said I would be doing XYZ. When I got there, it was for a paint company, But then I got there, and then first thing I smell is all this strong fumes and odors.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at it, all we're doing is taking panels and we're putting it up to a machine, finding out what color, hexadecimal number on the color wheel it corresponds.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like chemistry one. It didn't feel like I was doing, my interest was research and also it was computational, right? Using computers to do simulations and things like that, right? The computational sciences and analytics. That was my interest. I wanted to be an R&D chemist. I think if I went down that path, maybe things would be different. But eventually I said, you know what? I need to find a different way to go about this. So I said, you know what? I think my best gate of entry into this world is to become a data analyst.
Okay.
Because there's similarities. I think the intersectionality between computational science and data science is machine learning.
Yeah.
Because you use the computers to simulate or model something.
Right.
And so, yeah. So I went down that path. I said, you know what? I left this job. I had a existential crisis. I said, screw it. I'm going to go ahead and just try and get into the administrative fields so that way I can kind of wiggle up there. So I became an administrative research assistant, having research in the title. for a clinical research company. Now called Centricity, formerly Inventive.
Okay.
And a small company, at least when it was Inventive, and they did a merger. So yeah, then that was my journey. I was dealing with databases and things like that, and I did a little bit of that as a lab tech, but I was getting more hands-on, but I was just managing it, right? I was doing some clerical work too, but it was really just managing a database, building it out for the researchers to do their clinical trials, the coordinators and whatnot, and the investigators. But when it came time to offer a role for data analytics, they didn't have one, and it seemed like they weren't really gung-ho about creating one. It was down the line. I had to give a pitch for it. So that's, but during this time, I was working on certificates. I got a data analyst certificate, a statistics with Python certificate, and this is all online. This is the beauty of the age we live in. We can pursue things much easier than we ever could. I wanted something concrete on my resume, right? Because a lot of people can do it. They can go to YouTube University, which is unofficial. I wanted something concrete I could put on a LinkedIn profile on a resume. And then, I did project management as well, a project management certificate. And so I left and I found a job at Ohio Health at the top of this year. That didn't pan out. There were so many sudden business changes when I got there. My manager his role got axed, and they did departmental changes. I feel like I was unintentionally set up to fail, right? And the reason I say it is because they were, my management, they were nice, but they really didn't, it didn't feel as accommodating. Because even after I left the role for my current role as a business data analyst, they reached out. I think she's a senior vice president right now. She actually offered me a job, or she gave me she posted a job opportunity on my LinkedIn page for me, even after I left. So I appreciated that, right? But yeah, so that's how I got on this journey. Long story short, right? I realized that doing empirical chemistry and empirical bench work wasn't my true calling. It was using computers and analytics to solve issues, and using computer simulations particularly to solve issues, preferably within the sciences, but anywhere really.
I feel you, man. I feel you on that. And I mean, just to piggyback off of what you just said, these days I'm noticing that a lot of the kids, well, I won't say a lot, few of them are now using platforms like YouTube and Twitch and all these other venues, bro, to become they're making it quite big online, selling on Shopify, coming out with their own online shops and businesses, e-commerce. I mean, you name it. These kids are really forging their own path, in the world. So whereas in the past, the one way to success was college education, you get a degree, you get your 9 to 5 and this and that. Do you feel as though the importance of the degree is beginning to degrade with time and with some of the resources and innovations that are coming into play these days?
It's a paradoxical answer, so it's yes and no. Because yes, in the sense that knowledge has never been more available at our fingertips. And yes, you talk about the proliferation of social media, which then led to the DIY age that we're in, where people can do it themselves. Right? You want to learn how to paint a deck, you can go on YouTube, and then you can take a course. Maybe there is a course. If you want to learn how to do computer science, anything that involves a computer, right? Whether it be marketing, computer science, anything that's a desk job or clerical work, you can find a program online. I did mine through Coursera, and I paid for it, yes, but it was very cheap. You're talking about $50-something a month. That's dirt cheap compared to college. And so absolutely, I think people should explore those avenues too, as we're talking about what is the degree diminishing in its value. And so this is YouTube, right? It's going on YouTube.
Yes,
channel.
sir.
So yeah, absolutely, yes. And I think that if you have the ambition as you do, as people like my brother do and others in the world, absolutely go for what you want to do. But I think the degree will never completely fade out, because we need centralized institutions to kind of piggyback off that religious conversation about absolute truths and universal truths, right? We need things to be centralized at some point, because if it's left up to decentralization, then that's when you get things that are done inconsistently, right? A degree is meant to say, hey, you were vetted through these people who were vetted through this institution, and you did things the right way. So if everybody's online learning how to be a landscaper, and then everybody's doing that, and say like this, in the even if it's not even probable, the very improbable chance that everybody's online learning and nobody wants to do universities have gone extinct at this point. You don't know the quality of the work that people are going to do, right? Because you don't know the time they spent other than the fact that they were online. Now, if you are doing a Coursera or online coursework, which I think the accessibility is beautiful, then that's different in the sense, especially when it's like live classes, like, where there's online lectures and stuff like that. But in any case, they're still good. But I still think that the university is needed because also what people consider a waste of time in gen eds is truly what's going to help us connect and form that pluralistic society, right? The more isolationism that I was hinting at earlier is because people isolate themselves from other people's understanding of ways of life, right? So when I see that, those old Everest commercials and now, they're defunct now at being a for-profit school that, Biden's giving them relief for and everything like that. But they were saying, I didn't have to take extra classes I didn't want to take. What does that mean? Because I need my nurses to understand, ethics in healthcare and science, ethics in science, so that way we can lower the mortality rate of black women in childbirth, giving birth to children, right? The same way I need my politicians to take a science gen ed in their political science course and curriculum, so that way they're not spreading misinformation about vaccines. So yes, it's still, the university still holds a place for centralized learning, the way we can vet people, and the way we can hold a standard for learning and academia and achievement, especially when institutions are trying to cripple K through 12 learning and public institutions like that. University is probably one of the few true places where you can get a quality education. And even though universities may be different, it's still quality education if you apply yourself.
I feel you, man. I mean, and there are certain majors where you definitely need an institution. I wouldn't want a doctor who just got their freaking degree off of YouTube. They do a freaking surgery on me, man.
Absolutely.
You get that?
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure, man, you wouldn't want to be flying in a plane to some guy, who backyard freaking engineer guy. You feel me? So it makes sense. There's a time and place for everything. The next question that I really wanted to ask you, recently, I read also caught, glimpses of it on YouTube that affirmative action, has been slashed.
Yes.
And then I saw Candace Owens, come on YouTube and she gave her freaking piece. And to some extent, I agree with her. Oh, I'm not going to say what she said, but, I agree to a large extent on what she said. I wanted to get your piece on that as well.
Yes, I definitely heard about that. I know it's been repealed. And, I didn't hear what Candace Owens says, but I know she leans a certain way. She's definitely far right wing, and so I know where it's going with that.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean you have to, that we always have to disagree with her, even though she's a sellout. But yeah, to the point, I think you can actually look at it in multiple ways.
Okay.
Individually, it can be like, you know what? I know I'm an overachiever. I know I work hard, right?
Yeah.
I don't want nobody to think I got a handout. That's been kind of like the myth amongst black people, especially the black elite, what they call black high achieving people with PhDs, six-figure jobs, people who are doing well for themselves, the black elite, right? I didn't need a handout. And I understand that, right? Because we worked hard for what we got for it. Exactly. We all did.
Exactly.
But I think it's important to remember the reason why it exists in the first place.
Okay.
America's not Germany, right?
Yes.
Whereas Germany was forced to give reparations to Holocaust survivors, there was nothing like that for America. And regardless of what people say, the treatment of black and indigenous people in America, the United States of America to be particular, extends hundreds of years.
Yes.
And people hate hearing that. But it's like even after the slavery part, you still had Jim Crow.
Yeah.
Even after Jim Crow, now you have police brutality, right? So at the end of the day, that's to say, if you were to run a race, I really want to attribute this to the right person, but I'm not going to say. All I'm going to say is that I heard it from someone, and I couldn't tell you who, but if you were to run a race, right?
Yeah.
You put everybody has the same, imagine we're running 100 meters, we're running one lap around the track, right? Say everybody were to start this same starting point, right? This is the starting line.
Okay.
It's a straight line. That would be unfair. As mathematicians, scientists, nerds, we know the inside of the track is shorter than the outside.
Yeah.
So what they have is what's called a waterfall. And I alluded to this earlier. What that is equity, right? It's not, equality says everybody gets the same thing. And, when there was communists, the Red Scare and all that, that's what people were worried about, right?
Yeah.
But, I'm on the left. I'm definitely left-leaning politics. I'm definitely on the left,
okay,
right? I argue more for libertarian socialism, democratic socialism, which involves equity, right? That doesn't say that everybody gets the same thing. That says that everybody gets what they need, So if you're on the outside, you get to start a little further up.
Okay.
So now let's talk about like that in terms of the 600 years of oppression and slavery and things like that to, people of our, the black diaspora, right?
Yeah.
affirmative action was a part of that.
Okay.
It's saying like, look, white people, y'all were never oppressed. Y'all got all this time to learn. It was never a point in your history in America, or even before that, where reading was banned. Okay. If it was never recent enough as it was with black people, right?
Okay.
So it's like saying, hey, here's the waterfall for black people, right? So that's the thing. And yeah, time has passed since then, but we're still dealing with some of the effects because there was never been holistic equity for black people in America. So affirmative action was just one piece of it. So if people are wondering why after all these years, 50 since it was first passed, right, that we still need, is because that's just one piece of it. So it's still other extenuating circumstances that keep people from achieving that higher level, right? And so white mediocrity has always been rewarded. And that's what we were competing with, right? Because it was assumed that they would do well, right? There's the, stereotype that, there's Asian model minority, that they're all good at like the sciences and math and things like that.
Hey man, I've seen it with my own eyes.
Exactly, right? But then also it's a stereotype. Not every Asian is good with math. Every Asian person
that's also true.
in Asia is a big diaspora of its own, right?
That's for true.
So yeah, I mean, like I see both sides. Yeah, I think, black people are high achieving. We always have been, right? We've always been told by our parents we had to work twice as hard as our non-black counterparts, right? We've always been told that. However, affirmative action is just a small piece of what we've always deserved, which is equity in America, which we'll probably never get, and that's the truth.
I see. Well,
Yeah.
that's a very, very cogent way to put it.
Yeah.
Then again, I also hadn't, looked at it the way you put it. That, like the track, analogy that you use.
Exactly.
I mean, that was so brilliant. That was so brilliant, man. I hope, ideas like these. I mean, sometimes ideas don't necessarily have to agree. But if everyone can really present their point, in a more cogent fashion like this, where people can decide what direction to go, I think that'd be quite impressive. And that would definitely be, to some extent, the society that I would wish to live in.
Absolutely.
And then one of the previous questions, you mentioned using this idea of a centralized system. So I wanted to branch off a bit to talk about blockchains.
Yes.
We all know that blockchains are this new innovation where, it's supposed to be decentralized.
Exactly.
And a lot of people like that idea because if you look at the government, I mean, the idea, or at least the analogy that I always use is that if I print money in my basement and try to go use it at Walmart, I'm going to be arrested and taken to jail.
Exactly.
God knows, how long that takes, for that to happen. Yet the government is able to print however much money they need at whatever time they want, right? And to some extent, well, I would say to some extent, by all extent, debase the value of the dollar. Every year we get inflation. Where do you think that comes from? Right? By all this currency printing, we oversaturate the value of the money that we have.
Exactly.
And so I wanted to get your idea on that, blockchains and, decentralized systems. And then even talk about maybe if you've invested in that space, what your experience, has been.
So to your point, I think that's more of a moral and ethical issue in terms of why we still experience inflation, why the government is doing things that its citizens cannot, right? Because if there's one place where we should have equality, is as citizens, right? Our roles in society may not be equitable, but we should have equality as citizens in what we affect. So yeah, that is an issue. When it comes to decentralization, the problem is that we're decentralizing in a late stage capitalist society, which is now borderline fascist, meaning that there are people, the few get to control the many, right?
Yes, sir.
And so there is a moral ethical issue there. So when we talk about decentralizing, is it really decentralized, or is it centralized around a certain small group of people, the 1%? So I think that's what is, I think the latter statement, which is a rhetorical question, is what it is, right? So I'm not against it entirely, right? That's where the libertarian, in terms of libertarian socialism, that's where the libertarian part comes in, right? That we all, take care of our own, in a sort of Springsteen fashion, right? So yeah, there's that, but then the idea of centralization is about, think about the Articles of Confederation, right?
Yeah.
The reason why that didn't work is because it wasn't creating a strong central government.
Yes. So,
and that's why certain things always need to work on a federal level. I think healthcare, public schooling, public education, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things need to work. And then when it comes to financially, I do think there needs to be more regulation. And that's what ideally, and that's why I said earlier, everything on paper, it would work like that. If we kind of got rid of these notions and fairy tales about communism, socialism versus capitalism and things like that. And we were just open to doing whatever was the next best thing and at least trying it, right? In an experimental fashion with an objective purview about what could happen in the future, right? Because when I look at our poverty rates, when I look at the rate at which we jail people, the rate in which, you know, our education level compared to other countries, it's embarrassing. We were never, the problem with the statement, "Make America Great Again," is the again part. We were never great. You know, we always had some sort of Achilles heel or some sort of flaw, some sort of chink in our armor, and sometimes it was a gaping hole, right?
Yeah.
That kept America from being great, right? And if we sealed that up, we could have been great. But I think there are certain notions that we passed on, such as manifest destiny, that's creeped into society in its own way, and has reared its ugly head in its own way, even outside of the sort of literal existential way in which it was taught to us in school.
Yeah.
You know, and so you know, that's held us back. So yeah, when you talk about blockchains, yeah, I know the decentralization of that, right? Because you talk about Bitcoin being founded, and that's the thing too. The founder made it because he was trying to solve an issue with banking and credit card security, right?
Yes.
And so basically, all he did was take, you know, the funny thing is you talk about legal versus illegal, and you know, it's beautiful in the way it manifested, right? The technology itself, right?
Yeah.
Because you know, at the same time while he's doing this, a popular technology that we're using was illegal, which is torrents, right? To download music and movies, torrent files, because that's really nothing but peer-to-peer file sharing. That's what blockchain is. Really, that's what it's operating on, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, it's based on the security, you know, the ledgers of that, right? So, you know, you can verify who had made the last transaction based on that. So, you know, I haven't invested in it because, like, I haven't sat down and learned how to do it technically.
Okay.
You know, and I definitely want to because, like I said, the reason why I'm going into this field of machine learning, I want to learn how to apply simulation, modeling, and any statistical analysis to any field, right?
Yeah.
And that's where blockchains come in, because when you talk about being able to query things, right, or like being able to verify something, I think that's similar to like querying a database, you know. And you know, being able to like learn patterns, right? Machine learning comes in, you know, learn patterns and what works best. So yeah, I haven't dabbled in it myself, but when it comes to decentralization in terms of government, I think that has to be tempered, because some things should not be left to state rights or individual rights, right? I shouldn't be left, you know, to the decisions of an individual, and that's what we're experiencing, right? Because there's unfettered wealth, right? If you have more money than anybody, obscene amounts of wealth that you will never spend, and that honestly you don't deserve, because nobody in this world made it on their own. The idea of self-made that's being used to describe some billionaires and millionaires is it's a misnomer, because nobody's self-made. We didn't build the building that we grew up in. We didn't, you know, give birth to ourselves. We didn't, you know, grow the food that we ate as kids and as adolescents. So just at some point we all owe it to society, and that's where taxation comes in. I'm fine with it. I think it could be tinkered to be better, you know, sought for those who are the least of these, or who have received less in the world. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's important to centralize certain things when it comes to health, wealth, and education, right? Because if it's left to some, right, we're seeing that now with the privatization of a lot of things. That's not decentralization. That's fascism, right? It's being hoarded to a certain very small faction. And that faction is a central group, and they're doing it based on their own selfish interests.
I feel you on that, man. And I feel like, you know, most people look at decentralized systems and think that they're going to be a replacement for the current, you know, all the current centralized systems.
Exactly.
That's not the case. I mean, there are some current centralized systems that are much more efficient than decentralized systems will ever, you know, hope to achieve. We can improve them a bit, right, in a centralized fashion, but not in a decentralized way. The same way people even talk about quantum computers and classical computers. Some like picture processing and YouTubing. I mean, like, how much better do you want it, man? Like, you don't need a quantum computer to do YouTube, you know? So the quantum computers are going to be used for specialized problems like simulations and, you know, breaking codes and, you know, encryption and that sort of stuff. So the same way applies. I wanted to really ask you though, because you seem like a person who seems, you know, well-grounded in terms of your beliefs and your ideas. And so I wanted to know, what leaders, whether they be black or white or whatever they may be, do you look up to as inspiration or even as role models?
There are many. I start with close ones. Mr. Hawkins was an inspiration.
Okay.
To me, and I'm not gonna speak for you or anything like that. But like in terms of people out in the world, right? I don't. Even though I'm not religious, I don't believe in idolatry.
Okay.
Like I don't. I'm gonna say idolize because I feel like that goes into worship.
Okay.
And I don't worship any human being.
Okay.
But like in terms of being inspired by, absolutely, Mr. Hawkins was one. Dr. Brown. Who I need to see. I want to see both of them. And then outside of that, in terms of figures in history, I'll start contemporary, right? I used to talk about Cornel West, who actually I think he's trying to run. He's running for president.
He's running for,
yeah. He's in the Green Party, I think, yeah. And so, and whether or not he's successful, and whether or not he's, whether or not people believe he's another old man, a lot of his musings have, definitely rubbed off. When I said the least of these, I was quoting him, and I'm big on attributing quotes to people who, attributing ideas to people who came up with them. So
yes, sir.
Sorry, I'm dodging bugs.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Hey, man, that's we're sitting in my backyard, bro. So if you see us ducking and dodging, man, we're ducking and dodging bugs, man.
Exactly. So I ain't out here just being, I ain't on no drugs. I ain't tweaking or anything, But no, him. I think James Baldwin is definitely an influence. W.B. Du Bois, and then his counterpart Marcus Garvey. Of course, MLK, Malcolm X, and things of that nature. Richard Feynman, you mentioned him. He's like, when it comes to like wanting to do simulation science, his musings on physics and nanotechnology were what really inspired me. Marcus Aurelius, reading his readings. Of course, Einstein, Newton, those people, and things of that nature. I know you introduced me to Peter Thiel. His musings, I love that about going from 0 to 1 in terms of making an innovation. Those are a few, I'll say, just to start there, right? Because going back to Du Bois, right, like talking about the sort of double consciousness, one thing I feel like has been like, in terms of like decentralization versus centralization, that has been like my middle ground for anything in terms of looking at things objectively is find that golden mean, because hybrid theory, right? Hybrid theory is the idea of combining two systems and finding the best balance of those two systems to make a new system, right? The next car I get is going to be a plug-in hybrid, because to me that's a true combination of gasoline and then electric power, because electric power still comes from a grid that runs on coal and natural gases, right? When they had the gas line that got hacked, people were hoarding gas. First of all, that shows selfishness of society, but secondly, if you have a hybrid, right, it runs on gas longer, so there's no need to do that. Right? Or you can run on the electric engine exclusively and just charge it at home. So yeah, I mean, there are all these people who influenced me to think like that. I know I kind of want to answer the last question a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I went back, man. But long story short, yeah, I mean, those are people who influenced me. There are countless others. Those who shouldn't be nameless, but because of my bad memory, are in the moment. So yeah.
I feel you on that, man. And the sun has been freaking like hot as heck, man.
Yeah, sorry if I look sweaty. I don't know. Yeah,
I'm already dark as heck, man. And today, man, it look like I'm getting barbecued out here, man. You feel me? So we're gonna wrap this up, man. And the last question I really wanted to ask you is, are there any outstanding ideas or last minute, takeaways that you wanted to leave the audience, man? Because mind you, these are the Diaspora series, right? Where we're trying to compare, living in the U.S. against everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one thing I like to say to kind of like finish that last question, since I jumped back on that last question to another question. Like my peers, you inspire me, like your ambition, my brother's ambition, that he's so gun-ho, like, working on cars and starting a family, like he knows what he wants to do and he's able to do it, right?
Yeah.
I talk about my ADHD being like a sort of like obstacle, but I don't want it to be a barrier where I can't go over it, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't want that to be an excuse. And like seeing you guys all achieve what you said you were going to achieve, right, is inspiration, right? It's not something I read in a comic book. It's happening in real life. So my peers, right? I'm never scared to give people their flowers. That's a big thing that people talk about a lot.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to do that first, but even my dad, persevering and in the midst of my mom's passing, my family, my girlfriend, making things work and just being so supportive, right? Encouraged me to reach out to you and my friends and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's everybody who's ever supported me, Dr. Brown, anybody who I haven't talked to, rest in peace, Miss Knotts,
Yes, sir.
I wish I could have spoke to her one more time, and anybody who's ever been an inspiration, I don't think it's just big names, right? Those are just like more philosophical and ideological people who inspired me, right, when I named them, outside of the professor, our teachers and stuff. But then dialing back from that, the only thing I would say too is in terms of diaspora, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons why Du Bois is influential because he talks about the cosmopolitan Negro, right?
Okay.
Cosmopolitan being like the Negro in the cosmos or in the world, right? The black
sir.
person in the world, right? I think part of that is knowing that we should pursue pluralism and equity wherever we're at. And to me, what that looks like is it doesn't matter if you're in an interracial relationship. I don't care about your sexuality. I don't care about what your religious beliefs are. We're going to disagree. There are going to be people who disagree with your lifestyle, your beliefs, your relationships. There are going to be people who disagree. I think at the end of the day, though,
yes, sir,
if we can all look out for each other as black people,
yeah,
I think, when shit hits the fan, you stick up for someone they're being screwed over, right? Not to cuss or anything, but, I think that's what's going to really help us, right? Wherever we are, you see a black person, if they're in an interracial relationship, if they're in a relationship that's same sex, just saying, all right, regardless of how you feel about anybody's lifestyle, saying, you know what, I hope you're doing well. And that's the thing, right? Because, you may be out in a country where there are very few black people, like there is at some of these higher institutions, right? Mm-hmm. We experience that, right? The sort of the literal numeric minority feeling, So like just knowing that you can, we can lean on each other. I feel like that's where the umoja, right? We talk about Kwanzaa and whatnot. That's where that comes in, right? And then we can have this sort of like community and cooperative economics and cooperative social, gathering too, right? Just being able to check on each other and just show each other some love, And so that's why I would leave that on that note.
Fantastic. One last question. Are you a Pan-African, man? All these ideas, kind of took me back to like people like Kwame Nkrumah and Marcus Garvey.
Absolutely.
Those guys were Pan-Africanists, man. Are you a Pan-African?
Yes, to a degree. So when I say that, it's like I'm not a black nationalist Pan-African, like, where since that I think that we need to be in a black nation state, where we need to be physically in the same space. And that's why I'm saying we need to be cosmopolitan. And that's why Du Bois was antithetical to Marcus Garvey. They went, they butted heads for that reason, right? He called him a sellout. But I believe in what Du Bois says in that sense. I love Marcus Garvey's unapologetic blackness. We need to be unapologetically black wherever we are in the world. Okay. It doesn't need to be in the same space, right? Okay. I think, if we decide to have black communities, right, a black Wall Street, like Mount Vernon used to be here before 672 tore through it, and stuff like that, that's beautiful. But if that's not your community, that's fine, right? I don't believe that, like Dr. Umar Johnson and, now and Marcus Garvey then talk about, we don't necessarily need a Back to Africa movement, right? I think that all of us, because also, you can test, probably attest this more than I can, right? Being that, you are Ghanaian and that you actually are from Africa, I think the one thing that distinguishes an African American, some people don't like that term, but I feel like there's no other term that describes those of us who are products of the transatlantic slave trade, right? There's a sort of dual consciousness that Du Bois talks about, right? I'm black, but I'm not, I can't trace my roots directly through my parentage. And so that's a different feeling than like you or other people who can say I'm Ghanaian. I can't identify a nation state that has my direct ancestral heritage.
That's true.
If
I go to Ghana right now, I got family back there.
Exactly. And so like I can't say that, right? It's a hodgepodge and and things like that. And but I think regardless of that, we can find ways to connect and not divide ourselves, but we can be honest about those differences too and talk about how do we go forward objectively. But I think the way to do that is to say like, no, we don't need to be all under one community. If you want to, beautiful, right? Nation Islam is that, right? It is beautiful, right? And there are other communities. I'm sure there's, a lot, right? You have the Nation of Gods and Earths, right? The 5%ers. You have the Hebrew Israelites. That's another black community, right? And, regardless if you think about those as black communities, they are, right? But they're not all inclusive, and I don't think we need all inclusive. I think if you're a Hebrew Israelite, you're a 5%, you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're a black Buddhist, you can look across at any community and say, hey, we support you, at least as a black person trying to make your way in this world, because being black and resilient is probably the most brave thing you can do. When I know Cornel West, a lot of black intellectuals, others have echoed that sentiment throughout history, right? That being black in public and loving your blackness in public is probably one of the bravest things you can do, and so I think if we do that with a cosmopolitan mindset, that we're a part of the world and we're not just isolated to one corner, because we never want to be isolated. We want to understand what people think and want to be able to connect with them, where romantically, personally, in any other form, but we want to never have to forsake our blackness in terms of pursuing what we want to be in the world. And that's the main thing.
Fantastic. Now we can end.
Yeah.
Fantastic, man. Thank you for coming through, bro.
Absolutely,
and it's always a freaking pleasure, bro.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're talking, and doing this series. I'm glad I could contribute.